They were born under stained glass and scripture, and died where no prayers could reach. The Whitmores built sanctuaries, but within them, they hid curses older than Christ. To this day, their family name is spoken only, behind locked doors, and always with the lights on, because when the Whitmore family prayed, something always answered. They built it high above the tree line, where the fog came early and left late stone and ivy covered its flanks. The windows were thin and tall, like the eyes of saints watching something they couldn't name inside. The Whitmore house smelled like cedar and thyme, the kind of air that clung to old paper, pressed flowers, and prayers no longer spoken aloud. The Whitmore family had been writing history for more than 100 years. Their name was etched in the yazes, cornerstones of seminaries, carved into the backs of choir benches, whispered in the footnotes of theological texts, published in Latin, Greek, and once in a language no one could identify. They were missionaries, they were priests, they were architects of faith each generation. From 1782 to 1939, had produced at least one ordained scholar. A Whitmore never retired. They either died in service or vanished in it. Local clergy referred to them as the bloodline of conviction. But something wasn't right at first. It was only found in the family's records. Their Bibles were annotated not with interpretations, but corrections. Crossed out scripture, rewritten margins, footnotes that led to no known translation. Their Latin wasn't Roman. Their Greek had pronunciations no scholar could trace. The family's oldest surviving diary, dated 1791, opens with a single sentence: "To know him is not to love him." That diary was written by Elias Whitmore, the family patriarch, who served as both priest and surgeon in the colonies. He performed 3 recorded exorcisms only. One is documented as successful. He died in 1803. His death certificate reads, "Cause unknown, no wounds, eyes open." The house he built, First Whitmore Estate, was designed to face away from the sunrise. This, according to blueprints found decades later, was intentional, to not wake what sleeps below. It became a family tradition, though. Whitmore residence, monastery, or chapel ever faced east. People called it symbolic, but the groundskeepers said something else. They said when the sun rose behind it, the shadow of the estate stretched out like a hand. For most of the 19th century, the Whitmores expanded their influence. Their sons became bishops. Their daughters taught scripture in convents, where they were referred to not as sisters, but as guardians. In 1834, the third-generation Whitmores funded the construction of a mission in southern France. The architect never finished. Vanished on the 11th week of construction, leaving behind a single sketched floor plan, circular, layered, descending like a spiral. The plan had no roof. The church ordered it destroyed. The land remains undeveloped, but it's what happened in their homes that others remember. By 1860, rumors had spread among Whitmore staff and tutors that the family observed a second mass privately after midnight. That strange music, wordless and pulsing, could be heard behind their chapel doors. That candles in the Whitmore crypt never melted, only flickered. One servant claimed to have seen Eleanor Whitmore kneeling in prayer before a mirror, not a crucifix. Her reflection was not kneeling, but no reports were filed. No one dared, because by then, the Whitmores had become untouchable. Their family funded restorations of the Vatican, archives they donated to every major seminary from Boston to Prague. They were offered land, deference, and silence. They used it in 1882. A young seminarian named Joseph Keppel attempted to transcribe one of the Whitmore prayer books for academic study. Wrote 3 pages before going blind in one eye. He told the Inquisition that the words burned backward. His notebook was recovered, but it was blank. The Whitmores did not deny the event. They simply stated, in writing, that the texts were never meant for reproduction. By 1901, their estate had grown to include 3 chapels, 2 private libraries, and a subterranean structure they referred to only as the scriptorium. No blueprints exist for the scriptorium. No one who worked there ever spoke of it, but deliveries were regular: ink, vellum, salt, and sheep hearts. In 1924, a visiting archbishop was invited to stay with the family for 3 days. He left before the first night ended. His only statement was this: "Their faith is deeper than ours." In the final years of their public life, the Whitmores withdrew from society. They stopped attending councils, they stopped funding schools, and they stopped appearing in photographs in one of the last known portraits of the family taken in 1932-7. Whitmores are pictured six-face the camera the seventh. A young woman appears turned completely around, her back to the lens, as if watching something just out of frame. Historians dismissed it as motion blur, but the photo was taken with a long exposure, and her outline is razor-sharp by 1939. No Whitmores remained in public life. Their estate was shuttered, their records sealed, their libraries boarded. The grounds declared unfit for habitation due to structural decline. But locals still passed by. They said the air near the estate felt colder, that birds never landed on the roof, that on certain nights, especially during Lent, you could hear voices chanting, not loud, not angry, just rhythmic, familiar, and wrong, because the syllables didn't belong to any known language, and sometimes they sounded almost human, and that was the last thing anyone heard before the Whitmores were forgotten, till someone found the first tape. Snow fell that night, soft and soundless, covering the gravel paths with a hush like white cloth. On the young body of a St. Aldhelm Seminary stood still against the sky, tall, narrow, and starless, built in limestone and framed by black timber. It had the shape of a chapel, but the sternness of a fortress. No decoration, no bell, only a wooden crucifix bolted above the door. Arms weathered smooth by rain. It was founded in 1826, just outside Portsmouth, funded entirely by the Whitmore family, designed as a finishing seminary for priests, judged unfit for standard placement. Its first students called it the Silent School. No choir ever sang there, no organ was ever installed, but it had a library 4 times the size of its chapel, and a cellar that no one remembered building. On March 14, 1841, a boy named Samuel Hark arrived at the seminary for morning service, found smoke curling from the edges of the window panes. The doors were warm to the touch, and there was no sound inside by the time the local fire brigade reached the building. It was already half gone. Windows burst in slow sequence. Flames crept across the eaves like roots through soil. It burned too slow for a structure made mostly of wood, too quiet. When the ash settled and the last beam fell, investigators found no sign of life. No students, no staff, no human remains, except for one. He was found in the chapel, pinned to the rafters upside down. His name was Father Lawrence Bellamy, a professor of liturgical history and a visiting faculty member from Cambridge. Had only arrived the week before. He was identified by the silver ring on his right hand, a day gift from the Whitmore family the year prior. The inscription read, "To silence what must be silenced." The crucifixion wasn't decorative. Both hands had been nailed through the palm, each spike driven clean through oak beam. His ankles bound, his mouth sewn shut with a rosary. The beads were threaded through his lips, looped and knotted, with the crucifix resting against his chin like an anchor. There were no defensive wounds. Coroner noted that the stitching showed precision, as though practiced. The fire, they concluded, had started beneath the chapel floor, but no maps of the building, none of the blueprints provided by the church showed any such space. No sublevels, no access points, just stone. But something wasn't right. One photograph survives from the investigation taken by a fireman hours after the blaze. It shows the scorched altar, the collapsed pews, and in the far corner, a small square door half open built into the floor. No one remembers seeing it. It's not visible in the official diagrams, and it doesn't appear in any photo taken before or after, but there. It is square, black, open. They sealed the remains of the building with timber and lime, buried what they could. The site was blessed 3 times. Church declared it closed by fire. But in the months that followed, letters began arriving at nearby parishes on signs scrawled in brown ink. One contained, Only a passage from Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14, "And the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screech owl also shall rest there." Another had no text at all, just a single sketchy rosary, looped into the shape of a human mouth. No handwriting was ever matched. In 1843, an archivist from the diocese named Merton Clay requested access to the ruins for an independent record. He was granted permission. He brought with him 3 assistants and a surveyor's map. The report was brief. The altar space was blackened, but dry, the stone floor. Intact, the beams above where Father Bellamy was found had been replaced with iron rods. They found nothing below. Clay's final note, added weeks later, raised questions. "The chapel is smaller now. I cannot explain this. There are fewer steps to the altar. The echo no longer returns my voice." One of his assistants, Lydia Fenn, left her position shortly after she told her parish priest that she'd seen a second staircase behind the choir wall, one that descended not in stone, but in something softer, like plaster or clay. She said she only took 3 steps down, but her lamp went out, and when she turned back, the stairs behind her were gone. Her account was never officially filed. She was sent to a convent in Wales, never seen again. St. Aldhelm Seminary was eventually razed in 1847. A convent school was built over its remains, but only operated for 2 years. Multiple students complained of hearing prayers at night recited from beneath the floor in a voice that wasn't Latin. Wasn't alone. Whitmore was ever investigated. No motive was ever confirmed, but Father Bellamy's body was never returned to his family. The church claimed no one had requested it, and the rosary, the one stitched into his lips, was never logged into evidence. It simply vanished years later. A confession surfaced in a private letter among the Whitmore archives. It was unsigned, but it was dated precisely March 14, 1841, the day of the fire. The letter reads, "We warned him. He tried to open it anyway. The prayers were never for the living. He said he wanted to see, so now he watches." And beneath the writing, drawn in trembling graphite, a small, square black door, still open, still waiting. The curtains in the nursery were never drawn, even in winter, even in rain. They hung open, motionless, revealing a single arched window that overlooked the east orchard, though no one could recall the orchard ever blooming. The nursery sat in the north wing of the Whitmore Estate. A quiet room, pale green walls, toy shelf, oil lamp, cross above the cradle, everything made of oak. The floor creaked softly, as if it was always settling. Her name was Henrietta Whitmore, born February 3, 1876, the 4th child of Gregory and Lillian Whitmores. She lived 11 weeks, died of fever. As recorded by the house physician, no autopsy, no embalming, no funeral. The death was not announced, no public mourning, no church bells, no obituary, only the quiet replacement of the cradle's linens. And the door closed halfway for the first time, and that's when things began to change. One servant, Eloise, a young housemaid assigned to the nursery first, reported I'd a sound at night, a soft knocking, not at the door, but from inside the walls. She described it as delicate, not frantic, not violent, just persistent, like a hand too small to be heard clearly, but too determined to be ignored. She told the head steward he told her to sleep on the other side of the estate. 2 nights later, he heard it, 2 knocking, 12 soft taps, then silence. Then again. The house physician returned 2 weeks later. He was asked not to enter the nursery. He did anyway, according to his journal, still archived in a private collection. He spent 17 minutes in the room. No one saw him leave, but when asked about what he found, he responded only once, "There are things that do not require breath to move." The entry ends there. The next morning, he resigned, and the Whitmores hired no replacement. By spring, the story spread beyond Staffa. Groundskeeper, passing by the north wing at dusk, saw the curtains shift not from wind, but from inside, as if someone had brushed past them with a small hand. He left his tools in the grass and never returned. For years, the nursery remained untouched. The door stayed closed, not locked, not sealed, just Close it began to rot along the edges. The wallpaper peeled, the oil lamp rusted in place, but the cradle remained. Clean, no dust, no cobwebs, no mold on the pillow almost. Prepared visitors to the estate were told the north wing was being restored, but no one saw scaffolding and the column. The only workers hired were dismissed within a week. One of them, a young Italian stonemason, refused to be paid. He simply left his tools behind and took a train east. In a letter found years later, he wrote, "I do not know what I heard. I only know it did not come from the floorboards. It came from beneath them." Henrietta's death certificate was signed, but not notarized. The parish priest, Father Caro, claimed he was never asked to perform last rites. When questioned, he said, "No burial was requested, only silence." By 1880, staff refused to clean the hallway outside the nursery. A second door was installed, leading to the main corridor, to avoid walking past it altogether. But even then, at night, people heard it. The cradle rocking slow, rhythmic, like breathed. Would stop if you got too close, but start again once you turned away. Some tried to explain it: old wood, uneven floors, a breeze from the window, but the window hadn't opened in over a decade. And that's when they noticed the door, always ajar by 2 inches, never fully open, never fully closed. It resisted latches. It ignored locks. One servant claimed he hammered it shut with 3 nails. The next morning, the nails were gone, and the door was open again 2 inches exactly. In 1897, the last housekeeper assigned to the north wing reported hearing crying. She left her post 2 days later, but not before making a final entry in the service log. "I went to check the door. The cradle was not rocking, but something was. I didn't look. I didn't have to. It was standing." Her entry ends with 4 words, written in large block letters: "Do not bury hair." In 1902, after years of silence, the Whitmores issued a private contract to a stonemason company in Essex. 2 men arrived with bricks, mortar, and lime. They were instructed to seal the room completely. No documentation of why, no ceremony, just silence. They worked through the night. When they finished, the door was gone. Only a pale outline of brick remained flush with the wall, seamless, like it had never existed. They were paid in cash and asked not to return. That part of the estate was left to crumble. By 1910, ivy had overtaken the outer wall. No one mentioned the room again, but the new servants were told, "Do not clean the north wing. Do not touch the curtains. Do not speak her name." Henrietta was never buried. Her grave does not exist. No photographs survive. Only a single hand-drawn sketch found in the back of a servant's prayer book. A small cradle, and beneath it, something drawn in faint, shaking pencil. A foot not resting, but standing pressed hard against the floorboards. The frame was gilded in iron leaf, so heavy that 2 men were required just to lift it onto the wall. It hung above the main staircase of the Whitmore Estate, 3 stories tall, flanked by stained glass and candle sconces, never wired for electricity. Was the first thing guests saw upon entering a portraiture on canvas. Constance Whitmore, the family matriarch, seated, hands folded over a pale blue dress, her eyes cast forward, not smiling, not scowling, just watching, calm, patient, still. No signature, no date, only a brass plaque beneath that read, "She who preserved us." The painting had been there for as long as anyone could remember. By 1921, the house had emptied. Only caretakers remained, paid by what little was left of the Whitmore Trust. The estate was aging. Mice in the floorboards, peeling wallpaper, a staircase that groaned not when you walked on it. But after that year, the family commissioned a small restoration effort, just enough to stabilize the upper levels and reframe a few aging pieces. Among them, the portrait of Constance. The first restorer assigned was Thomas Bell, a local painter. With a reputation for careful work, he was asked to clean the surface, repair, flake, and retouch if necessary. But from the moment he arrived, something bothered him. It wasn't the brushwork. It wasn't the composition. It was the eyes wherever he stood on the stairs, the landing, even crouched to tie his boot. Her gaze stayed fixed, always angled toward him, unchanging at first. He thought it was clever technique then. He tried measuring. I've stood at 12 different positions throughout the foyer each time. He marked the direction of her gaze on tracing paper. The marks overlapped perfectly. He told himself it was coincidence, but something wasn't right the next morning. He set up scaffolding to remove the frame. He noticed something strange along the top edge, a line faint but visible under angled light. It wasn't part of the painting. It was beneath it. When he pressed the canvas with a gloved finger, he felt resistance, as if the surface had been thickened, layered. Took a scalpel to the back one slow incision canvas behind canvas, and underneath, another painting older, rougher, but clearer still. Constance still seated, but different this version. Smiled not, wide not, soft type, confident, a smile. You didn't notice until it was already there, and in her lap, clutched delicately between her gloved hands, was a small, narrow knife turned upward, pointed toward her. No background, no chair. No candles, just the figure floating in dark brushstrokes. She stepped back and felt, watched, but not in the same way, not in the way a portrait gazes out, with something deeper, like the act of being known. He stopped work immediately, photographed the second layer, contacted the family solicitor. The solicitor arrived 2 days later with an archivist from the diocese. They viewed the painting, neither spoke then. The solicitor asked one question: "Did you touch the canvas?" Vel said yes. The solicitor nodded once and told him to leave. The portrait was removed that night, created covered logged under a false title, Virgin and Mirror, dated 1898. But no such painting exists in any registry. The crate was never listed in the estate's outgoing inventory, and Vel was never contacted again. But he didn't forget. In 1942, decades after the event, Vel wrote a private memoir. It was never published, but a copy was archived in the diocese's restricted collections. In it, he describes what happened in the weeks after he uncovered the second painting. He dreamed of her not as a figure in a chair, but walking, moving room to room, always behind him, always just out of reach. Sometimes she hummed a soft, tuneless rhythm, not a lullaby, not a hymn, just the sound of breath shaped into music. And then, on the fifth night, he heard it in his waking hours, not in the dream, not in his mind, in the corner of his room, a single whisper: "Don't cover me again." He never painted after that, not once. He refused commissions, he returned gifts, he withdrew from his parish. The last entry in the memoir is dated 1951. "I saw her again, not in the dream, in the reflection, just for a moment. She wasn't smiling anymore." No one knows what happened to the original. Some believe the painting was reburied, sealed behind a newer canvas, and rehung in one of the Whitmore chapels. Others say it was taken to Rome, hidden among the unlisted artifacts kept below the Vatican's northern wing. But Vel's photographs survived, stored in a black envelope labeled C. Whitmore. 2. 7 images, 6 showing the first portrait and 1 of the second, the darker canvas, cracked at the edges, knife in hand, eyes glinting. But here's the part no one could explain. In that final image, her smile is gone, and her hands are empty, as if bracing to walk. The floorboards in the east wing never settled. They held a certain weight, one that didn't match the rest of the house. Every step felt cushioned, like walking through old snow that refused to melt. The walls were a dull gray, almost green, not from paint, but from age, from breath, from years of voices that had spoken too softly, or not at all. That wing had no clocks, no mirrors, only a single room at the end of the hall, and a candle, one that never died. The Whitmores didn't assign the room often. It wasn't locked, it wasn't marked, but it was always clean. Dust never gathered on the sill, sheets never wrinkled. The air inside felt colder than the rest of the estate, but not dead, not empty, just watching. The locals called it the room of eternal Lent. No one knows who first used the phrase, but those who stayed there noticed the same thing. Time did not behave. They said hours slipped in ways they couldn't track. Mornings arrived too slowly. Nights refused to end. Prayers, once begun, repeated themselves in strange rhythms. One guest claimed she read the same psalm aloud for 2 hours without realizing it. Another, a monk from Cannes, wrote in his journal, "I feel I have confessed but I cannot remember to whom. He checked out the next morning, but it was what happened in 1938 that finally drew attention. Father Ignatius Harlan, age 61, arrived from Canterbury to evaluate the Whitmore grounds for potential consecration. Was devout, precise, known for his resistance to superstition. He stayed in the East Wing. He chose the final room. He requested no candle. And yet, when the caretakers checked on him the next morning, they found him on the floor kneeling, mouth moving, rosary in hand. The candle beside him still burned its wax untouched when they spoke. He did not respond when they touched him. He looked up. Confused, he asked why they were interrupting his evening prayers. They told him it was morning 9. Hours had passed, but the candle hadn't burned an inch. He checked his pocket watch. It was still ticking but frozen, the minute hand locked. Between 7:12 and 7:13, he left the estate that evening. His only note, scribbled in the margins of his Bible: if there is a heaven, it does not measure time. The room was examined 3 days later. Nothing unusual was found. Floor, walls, ceiling, no vents, no strange markings, no insulation to account for the temperature drop. Just that candle, a tall white taper set in a brass holder bolted to the wall. They tried to remove it. It wouldn't move, not bolted, not nailed, just part of the wall. One caretaker attempted to snuff it out with his fingers. He burned 2 of them to the bone, but no smoke rose, no smell of wax, only the light cold, flickering, silent. Another visitor. The Whitmore family's last archivist spent a single night there in autumn. Documented every hour, kept 2 watches, a sand glass, a radio clock. He recorded himself praying, eating, pacing, humming, and sleeping when he reviewed the footage. Only 1 hour had passed, but his body showed signs of exhaustion: dry eyes, dehydration, a 5-day growth of beard. He never entered the room again. He sealed the tape in a lid box. No one has opened it since, but something wasn't right. The house. Records scattered across decades show inconsistencies. Invoices for candles in every room except one. That room, the candle was never replaced, never ordered, never described in purchase logs, and yet it always burned even after the estate was shuttered in 1959. Even after the windows were boarded and the halls emptied, a passerby decades later claimed to see a faint light through a crack in the East Wing's exterior. He assumed it was a squatter, but when authorities entered the house, nothing was found. No signs of life, no batteries, no flashlights, just the candle still burning, still whole, and the air inside. Cold, not like winter, not like stone, but like waiting, as if the room had never finished what it started. And then, in 1971, a final note was added to the family's estate records, typed, faint, misaligned. Time cannot be forgiven. It can only be observed, and beneath it, a hand-drawn circle, within it one single flame outlined in ash. The orchard was silent that morning. Leaves motionless. No birdsong, just the sound of gravel under boots as the groundskeeper passed the tree line. For the 3rd time that week, eyes scanning for something too small to be this heavy. Elijah Whitmore, age 11, had been missing for 13 days. No note, no trace, no witness. He had gone out after evening meal, asking to walk the perimeter before nightfall. He did this, often solitary, polite, a child of routine. He never returned by morning. They'd checked every outbuilding, every cellar, even the old root vault under the chapel. Nothing. No broken branches, no footprints, no dragging marks. Only one thing left behind: his shoes neatly placed at the edge of the woods facing in. For nearly 2 weeks, the Whitmores issued no formal statement. The police were not involved. There were no search parties, only quiet inquiries through private clerical channels. And then, on the 13th morning, just before dawn, he walked back into the house, barefoot, unshaken eyes open wide, his hands folded in front of him like he'd been waiting in line. But something wasn't right. His mouth was red. Not swollen, not injured, just open quietly and full of blood. Doctor arrived within the hour. He examined the boy without speaking, and after a pause, he made a single note on the paper. The tongue has been removed surgically. No bleeding, no scar tissue, no pain. But Elijah didn't cry. He didn't gesture, he didn't try to write. He simply stood then. At precisely 3:17 p.m., he walked into the Whitmore chapel and began to speak fluently without stutter, without delay, in a voice that did not sound like a child's. It was Latin, the old kind Vatican formal thick with consonants no one had taught him. His parents stared. He looked at no one. He stood at the pulpit and preached. The words had rhythm, cadence, not a recitation. A sermon he spoke for 13 minutes, and when he finished, he folded his hands again and returned to his room. They called for a linguist. He came from Leeds and brought with him reel to reel recorder. They played the sermon back at half speed, quarter speed, reversed. The translator made 2 notes. This is not memorized. Some of the grammar has no precedent. Then Elijah spoke again, this time in Aramaic, a language he could not have encountered, let alone mastered. The translator left the estate that evening and never returned. But the recording spread first to local clergy, then to Rome, and within 6 days, the Vatican sent observers, 3 men clergy linguists, trained in ancient tongues and theological forensics. They arrived without announcement, unpacked their equipment, and requested that Elijah be left alone with them in the chapel. For a single night, the Whitmores agreed. The doors were shut at 11:06 p.m. At 4:13 a.m., the doors opened again, but only 2 of them emerged. One walked with a limp, the other refused to speak. They left before sunrise and took nothing with them. No notes, no tapes, no explanation. The third man, Father Rule, was found just after dawn, still in the pew, not bound, not injured, just seated, hands clasped, mouth open, eyes wide, fixed on the altar. He was breathing, but didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't move, not even when they touched him, when they tried to lift him. His limbs wouldn't bend. It was as if his joints had forgotten how to respond. A local priest attempted an emergency rite of restoration midway through the prayer. He vomited, described the smell as iron and pine sap. No one else could smell it. Father Rule was transported to a Benedictine hospital in Florence. He remained there until his death 3 years later. Never said a word. Elijah, meanwhile, continued to speak once per day, always after sunset, each time in a different language. Some were recognizable, some were not. A team of linguists compiled his recordings into 3 volumes. The final volume, marked Dialects Unverified, contained phonetic structures never before documented. Some resembled prayer, some resembled code, some resembled song, but the melody was off, too flat in places, too long in others. It had been taught without ears. On the 44th day after his return, Elijah stopped speaking, just stopped, not a word, not even a breath out of rhythm. He folded his hands, again sat in the chapel pew, and remained there for 26 hours when they found him. He was asleep when he woke. He could no longer understand Latin, no Aramaic, no speech at all. He was returned to his parents, raised quietly, taught to sign, lived a long life, and never left the estate again. But years later, in the attic of the Whitmore Library, they found something strange, a piece of old slate resting beneath a floorboard, scratched into its surface were 13 lines of text, none matched any known language, but the final line was translated by a scholar in Berlin. Said it matched a fragment from the Apocryphon of Ezekiel, and the words read, "He spoke because he remembered, but he remembered something that does not forget." The binding was cracked down the spine leather, stitched by hand, dark with oil, stained by time, and smooth where fingertips had traced the same motion over and over again. It was found in a locked drawer in the eastern vestibule of the Whitmore Estate, beneath 3 Bibles, an iron key, and a faded stack of handwritten hymns. The guest ledger dated 1951 to 1958, and at first glance, it looked like any other book of its kind. Lines ruled with a faded fountain pen too. Columns, time of arrival, signature, except the names. Weren't there no initials, no last names? Just symbols, ink marks, geometric arcane. A few looked like crosses, but reversed or bent. One resembled a trident, drawn so precisely it looked printed. Beside each symbol, a time, never a date, never a room number, Just time 1:13 a.m., 4:44 m, 3:33 a.m. Always early. Morning always in threes, and under the time 1 final line, written in Latin never. More than 5 words advenit sine forma, non omnis qui claimant. Vigilat donec audis phrases no priest could explain fully. Arrives without form. Not all who cry out. He watches until you dare. Filled every page dozens all, from the 1950 SA time when the estate was. Officially, empty, no records show overnight guests, no bed linens ordered, no breakfast logs, no vehicle reports, and yet the ledger grew 1 line at a time, 1 symbol, 1 phrase, 1 hour no. Handwriting repeated, but something wasn't. Right in 1976, a theology graduate named Lena Tisdale received the ledger during a Whitmore archival transfer. She was instructed to catalog it, but she did more than that. She matched it page by page against regional missing persons reports, men, women, a few. Children, some were last seen at train stations. Others vanished during road trips. One disappeared from a chapel stairwell in the middle of confession, all within a 70-mile radius of the estate, all between 1951 and 1958. And the time of their disappearance matched exactly to the times in the ledger down to the minute. She created a chart side-by-side ledger entry on the left. Police report on the right 42 matches 42 people who were never seen again. No remains. No suspects. No motive, just absence, and none of their names appeared. Only symbols. She reported her findings, but the diocese didn't reply. 2 months later, Lena went missing. Her office showed no signs of struggle. Her lights were still on. Her tea was warm. Her chair was empty, and on the desk, the guest ledger opened. 1 new entry, written beneath the last no. Name just a time, 3:11 a.m. and a phrase propria voluntate of her own will. The ink was still wet, no fingerprints, just a faint smell, wax, dust, and old paper. The ledger was sealed in archive storage. Not destroyed. They were afraid to burn it, afraid to bury it, even afraid to translate the remaining phrases. But the phrases remained silent, waiting. And then, in 1994, something strange happened. A visiting priest, Father Marco Belmonte, opened a vault for research. He found the ledger, and when he opened it, he found his own handwriting. He had never seen the book before, never signed it, but the mark was his A. Crooked fish, drawn the way he used to sign his schoolwork, as a boy next to it. 206a, man, the Latin phrase. Vocidus est ante nativitatem, was called before birth. Father Belmonte was institutionalized 2 weeks later. He no longer remembered his own name, but he could recite every phrase in the ledger. In reverse, they sealed it again, this time in a vault lined with salt and cedar. No one's opened it since, but last year, during a structural inspection of the estate, workers found something behind the vestibule. Wall, another ledger, identical, binding blank. Pages except for 1 linear time tonight and a phrase, Veni et iterum, he will come again. The microphone was analog reel. To reel set between 2 high-backed chairs in a narrow parlor with shuttered windows and furniture that hadn't been moved since the war. Floor beneath, it was sloped slightly, uneven enough that anything dropped would roll to the same corner, and it was quiet, not the kind of silence that comes with stillness, but the kind that follows speech, like something had already been said. The year was 1966. The historian's name was Ronald Mertens. He had been granted access to the Whitmore Estate for 3 days. His goal, to interview the last living heir, a man named Silas Whitmore, age 79, unmarried, childless, legally blind. He hadn't left the property in over 2 decades. The church approved the request, but with a condition. The tapes must remain sealed until reviewed. What they didn't know was that Mertens had made 2 copies, one for the church and one for himself. The tapes began simply crackling, room tone. Then Silas's voice, slow, measured, flat. He answered the first questions plainly, his date of birth, his mother's name, the day the chapel was shuttered. But by the 3rd tape, something changed. His answers drifted. He began repeating himself, full sentences, not stuttering just certain words over and over. Cold, cold. Then he'd stop and whisper. No, there were gaps, 20-minute stretches of breathing then. Long humming noises, low and wet, like a throat struggling to remember how to make sound. But something wasn't right on tape 4. His voice changed, not in tone, in register higher, sharper, a rasp that cracked syllables like dry leaves. Mertens asked what year it was. Silas replied, no year now. Then laughed, not like a man, like a woman, soft and tight, like it hurt to keep it inside. Tape 5 is where things become harder to describe. The playback reveals 2 voices overlapping, but only one mouth, one voice speaking backward, other forward, saying the same sentence. He stands behind the altar, over and over. He stands behind the altar. At one point, Mertens steps away, the chair creaks, and then, clear as day, Silas says a name, not one. Mertens had given out anyone on record, but the name is heard twice, once by the tape, once by Mertens's own ear, because in his handwritten notes, now held in the diocesan archive, he circled it and wrote, he shouldn't know that name. That tape ends in static, no conclusion, no goodbye, just the sound of a hand brushing the microphone, and then silence. Mertens returned the primary tapes to the church. They were logged, reviewed, and ordered destroyed. But Mertens' second copy, his private duplicate, was stored in a safety deposit box in Derbyshire. It remained untouched for decades until 2011, when 12 minutes of audio surfaced online, posted anonymously to an obscure forum on pre-Vatican liturgical music. The file name was simple: S_W_tape_5_final. It spread quickly, then vanished, removed from every platform not flagged for content, but quietly erased, not even cached. But some listeners remember, and what they describe is consistent. The 12 minutes included no introduction, just a faint hum, then the phrase, repeated 3 times, "There are no walls in the dark," followed by what sounded like weeping, not distant, not quiet, right next to the mic. And then, at the 10-minute mark, a voice not belonging to Silas, not Mertens, not anyone verified, young, calm, but wrong, like it had learned to speak by watching others do it. It says, "This is not memory, this is permission. He spoke to me through the eyes." Then silence and breathing, just breathing, and then something no one agrees on the final words. Some say it was a warning, others say it was a prayer, but the cadence didn't match any language, and the words, when reversed, sound the same, phonetically mirrored her. Perfect. Loop linguists call it impossible, audio experts call it a trick, but those who heard it firsthand still dream about it. One man deleted every recording device in his house. One woman blocked all mirrors from her apartment, and one former seminary student who claimed to transcribe it by hand was later found curled on the floor of a bell tower in Toulouse, eyes wide, mouth open, repeating the words. He's still speaking, but now he's using me. No further clips have surfaced, but in 2014, a Vatican archivist published an anonymous letter online buried in a forgotten comment thread. 6 lines, no signature. The tapes were not burned. They were buried, not to hide them, but to stop them from finishing. If you hear the lost one, you won't remember your own voice. The morning fog hadn't lifted, yet the treetops swayed gently, but the air near the ground didn't move at all. And in the clearing, the Whitmore Estate stood perfectly still, 3 stories tall, shuttered, slumped veins of ivy strangling its stone bones. It hadn't been lived in since 1958. No one entered, no one left, only watched. The demolition was scheduled for March 3rd, 1979. The town council had finally approved the clearance, after years of pressure from real estate developers and residents who didn't like what they saw from the road. What they saw wasn't always the same. The windows never reflected light. The gates were rusted shut, yet sometimes they creaked at night, and there were stories of machines stalling when they passed the property line, of headlights flickering, of silence where birds should be, and of people who turned around without knowing why, but something wasn't right. The first bulldozer arrived at 6:42 a.m. It stopped moving at 6:44. The engine died, The ignition refused to turn, and when the operator climbed down, he found all 4 tires flat-slashed from the inside. Second machine made it 10 feet further. Then its hydraulic arms snapped clean at the joint. No resistance, just a sound like metal breathing in reverse. 2 workers were sent to assess damage only. One came back the second. A man named Lewis Caro was last seen walking toward the east wing. The crew heard his voice once over the radio. A single word not in English, no. One could agree on what it was. The radios cut out by noon. 3 more machines had failed, none from mechanical defect, all in different ways. Gauges melted, wires frayed. A cab door jammed until its glass burst from pressure inside. One driver refused to get back in his truck. Said he saw something in the upstairs window, not a persona shape, still watching. The demolition supervisor called for backup, but within 30 minutes, he began vomiting thick. Black tested later, no contaminants, just bile and salt. He left the site and never returned on the second day. They brought in a structural assessment team. All their instruments failed to record readings. One investigator claimed the building had no measurable mass. The others refused to enter, and one, a civil engineer from Sheffield, went home and mailed a letter to his bishop. It read, "The house does not end at the walls. There are no angles inside, only instructions." It was never clarified. The third day, they attempted fire-controlled demolition. Burn approved by the county. The crew cleared brush, doused fuel along the perimeter. No wind, no wildlife. The ignition point was set at 4:00 p.m. and at 4:01. Flames touched the foundation for the first time in nearly a century. The Whitmore house moved, but not like a collapse, not like fire taking hold. It shifted subtly, like something inside. Exhaled witnesses described a low moan, not mechanical, not naturally. Sound that didn't belong in open-air. A sound that stayed even after it stopped. Fire burned for 9 hours. Teams watched from every angle. Timber gave way. Smoke blanketed the hillside. By midnight, only embers. The estate was declared reduced. Ash reports were filed. Crews were paid, and the site was left to cool. But 1 week later, on March 10th, an aerial survey was conducted. Standard procedure, infrared photography, damage assessment. The photos were delivered to the city office the next morning, and on the top print, there it was, still standing, not scorched, not hollow, just there exactly as it had been, unchanged. Even the vines were intact. The county launched an investigation. They dispatched an inspection team with a low flying chopper, but the pilot en route turned back after radioing this. "We're seeing 2 shadows, one for the house, one behind it." No explanation was given. The photos were suppressed. A private firm was contracted to clear the land. They refused. The job said the coordinates were marked as unsuitable for excavation. The city paved over the access road, put up fencing, and officially declared the site uninhabitable due to soil instability. But the house is still there. Every few years, a new team tries again, but the results are always the same. Metal breaks, people vanish, time slips and ignite from the tree line. Locals swear they see light in the upper window, not flickering, just steady, a single candle in the room that doesn't exist on any floor plan. And sometimes, if you wait long enough, you can see a figure behind the glass, not moving, not breathing, just waiting, as if the house never meant to fall, because it wasn't built to be lived in. It was built to remain. The booth was cedar-lined, worn smooth by knees and elbows that had pressed against it for centuries. Its scent, old incense, old paper, and something harder to name, still clung to the velvet curtain in a side chapel of Santa Cecilia. In Trastevere, tucked behind the organ loft near the wall, no one prayed against. The priest found the letter at morning prayer, folded, once placed carefully on the wooden bench where penitents kneel. It had no envelope, no name, no date, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Angular, narrow letter forms that curled where they should have straightened. Whitmore scripta, private calligraphy used only within the family for ritual correspondence, never taught outside the bloodline, never seen on this continent until now. Paper was bone white, thick hand pressed the ink brown black, with a faint green sheen when held to light. The letter began simply 6 words. To whom is absolution still owed? Then a blank lineathin without greeting, without flourish. We did what was asked. We gave it our names. We gave it our voices. And when those ran dry, we gave it silence. We prayed without words. We knelt. Without names. We fasted for years, not from food. From memory, the letter did not explain who wrote it, but the rhythm was unmistakable, each line tight shaved of emotion, like someone afraid the page might listen one paragraph longer. Then the rest came near the center. It never told us what it was, only that it had always been. We thought it a veil, a means to see God more clearly, but it was not a veil. It was a mouth, and every prayer we spoke into it. We never got back. There was a break, then 2 lines. We believed we were chosen. We were not. Below this, an entire section had been crossed out, not scratched in haste, but methodically lines drawn through every letter, even the margins not. To conceal, but to seal as if what had once been written still breathed beneath the ink and needed binding. Next legible sentence returned to the first person, quieter now. I am the last of them. I do not sleep, not because I fear dreams, but because I do not want to return. It is easier in waking. It waits beneath the skin of thought, like oil rising in water. It watches from where words begin. One priest, Father Matteo Crissi, translated the letter. Alone he spoke 5 languages, but struggled to understand the final lines. The Latin was precise. It didn't function like Latin. The grammar bent. The verbs behaved more like acts than tenses. They implied consequence without cause. And the final sentence, written smaller than all the rest, sat at the very bottom of the page, alone in red ink on it. Semper non ignoscit. It still listens. It never forgives. Father Crissi sealed the letter in a steel file, logged it under anonymous confessional entries. But 2 nights later, the steel file was found open, no signs of forced entry, no security breach, just open. The folder inside gone, in its place 1 page blank except for 7 faint impressions, as if someone had written without ink, impressions deep enough to be read only under angled light, and the words, when revealed, weren't in Latin. They weren't in any known language, but according to one Vatican archivist who later examined them, each syllable corresponded to phonemes found in the Whitmore family's earliest liturgical entries, the private ones, never meant to be spoken aloud. When asked what the syllables might mean, the archivist declined to answer, but later, in an anonymous journal entry, he wrote, "The sequence feels recursive, as if it prays to itself, and it remembers being prayed. Santa Cecilia closed the confessional 2 days later. They claimed water damage, but no repairs were made, and to this day, the small brass sign affixed to the booth reads only, Perduto, lost, not broken, not closed, just no longer present, but visitors still leave folded pages on the bench, blank ones, not addressed to God, not addressed to anyone, just blank, as if to say, we are still speaking even if we no longer expect an answer, because something hears and something remembers, and whatever the Whitmores found wasn't waiting to be understood. It was waiting to be obeyed. The Whitmores were a family of prayer, but not all prayer is holy. What they uncovered beneath Scripture wasn't salvation. It was something older, and perhaps somewhere deep in the hidden catacombs of Europe's dying churches, something still waits for the last Whitmore to speak its name. Next time, we explore a monastic library where books are chained for a reason, and where one page is written in something that bleeds.